Here to talk about the proposed bills, Democrat leaders of the Oregon House and Senate, House Speaker Julie Fahey and Senate President Rob Wagner. Thanks to both of you for coming on the program from the Oregon State Capitol.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much, Steve.
You bet. First question, how are Oregon students doing when it comes to their education? A lot of parents want to know that. And Julie, let's begin with you on that one.
Well, thank you, Steve. So over the last few years, Oregon has made significant investments in our K-12 schools. And that's great. We're moving in the right direction. But no matter what way you look at it, Oregon students are near the bottom when we look at test performance versus other states. And that is just unacceptable. The Senate President and I find it unacceptable, and I know it's unacceptable to teachers and administrators and families all around this state. So we know that our teachers are doing really important work in the classroom, really incredible work in difficult circumstances, and they really deserve our support. And that's why it's so important that we get the accountability system right in this state. We need to make sure that as we're investing more resources in our schools, that we are seeing improvements in outcomes for those investments.
Why are Oregon students struggling so much right now? Rob, is there an answer to that?
Well, I think we have a really strong system of local control, which we're very proud of in this state. But sometimes that means that certain districts are doing really, really good things and implementing best practices and providing the supports that our students need. And sometimes other districts need just a little bit more support. So having been around as a dad and as a former school board member, I know that there are so many passionate and great teachers who really are doing incredible things right now in our schools. But what this legislation is about is on building on those successes, making sure that not only do they have the resources, but there's a framework that has multiple measures of accountability in order to move Oregon forward in all four corners of the state.
The accountability proposals are House Bill 2009 and Senate Bill 141. Tell us about the bills and the metrics, Julie.
Great. Well, the bills themselves have a number of important proposals in them. So one of them, the first, would add additional performance metrics to how we assess the performance of each district. So we have a set of metrics in place right now, graduation rates, third grade reading levels, et cetera. And we would add regular attendance in the early grades, kindergarten through second grade, and eighth grade math to those lists of metrics that we're using. This will help ensure that districts are focusing on the right things, the things that we know will actually improve student performance or that measure student performance. There's also a proposal to improve the data that we're using to make decisions around our school districts and how we how we teach our students. Adding more consistent interim assessments so that teachers can make real-time adjustments in the classroom for how they're delivering instruction. And then finally, we would take a more hands-on approach to support from the state to the districts that are struggling the most. What are the interventions they need? What are the resources and the supports? And how can we move them in the right direction for doing things that we know the evidence say works?
Are you confident these metrics will improve student outcomes, Rob?
Well, I think it's important to know that you've got to put the right measures in place in order to make sure that districts are focusing on the right things to do. And one thing also to build on Speaker Fahey's comments, there's a real commitment by the governor and this legislature and the state agency to try to reduce and find some efficiencies in how districts are having to report too many reports, trying to align the Department of Education, not just around compliance, but really trying to provide a supportive structure so that districts are getting the supports that they need that can get straight down to the students. So I'm very encouraged that this legislation is going to make a positive step forward in partnership with the state, working with additional funds and providing the supports that every kid needs in our districts.
What are the markers to determine that schools aren't meeting their goals, Julie?
Well, when the Student Success Act passed about 5 years ago, we created a set of 5 metrics to assess how well school districts were doing. Again, that's third grade reading, it's whether 4-year graduation rates, 5-year completion rates. And so the Department of Education right now assesses how well districts are doing versus those metrics. And we do have an intensive support program that we created with the Student Success Act back in 2019. For those districts that are struggling the most, there's 4 districts right now participating in that program. They get extra resources, extra assistance, and extra guidance from the State Department of Education to help them move the needle on student performance. We're proposing to expand that program make improvements to it, and make it mandatory. If a district is struggling, they have to have accept that support and help from the state.
How many schools are struggling right now? Do you have a number on that, Rob?
Well, we know that there's about 550,000 public school students in the state of Oregon. So our education system delivery goes down through the local districts, down to the local school, ultimately down through the principals, down through the teachers, and to the student. So within our schools, sometimes kids are doing great, and our principals are working hard, and they've got a lot of buy-in from their teachers. But what we found is it's making sure that every kid has the support that they need. So by aligning these metrics with funding down to through our local districts, the idea is not necessarily just to focus on the district level, but to make sure that kids in every school across Oregon are getting the supports that they need.
What kind of feedback are you getting from educators right now? What are they saying about these bills, Julie?
Well, we had public hearings on the bills this week, and so had great feedback from the public, from educators, administrators, and organizations all around the state. Generally, there's a fair amount of support for the proposals in this bill. Folks are in agreement that we can't keep doing the same thing and expect different results. We have to take action. Our students cannot wait for this. And so we're having conversations right now. Are there improvements? Are there tweaks that need to be made to the proposals in the bill? Are the timelines right? But by and large, there is strong support from educators and districts around the state. Folks know we can't keep doing things the same way.
Republican Representative Dwayne Yunker released a statement calling the governor's school accountability plan a wolf in sheep's clothing. He claims Kotek's proposal is a power grab that will create a bigger bureaucracy, take away local control from school districts, and punish the schools. How do you respond to his criticism, Rob?
Well, I think that we've seen efforts over the last 30 years on different iterations of trying to hold districts accountable and schools accountable. If you look at the legislation, what's so great about this accountability measure is that it's about supports. It's not about punishment. So, of course, there's criticisms that come at state agencies, but that's why it's so important that we look at accountability. We know that we need to get every dollar, we need to be making forward progress. We need to be holding state agencies accountable, and then providing the support straight down to the schools, straight down to the students. So if you look at the legislation, it's looking at multiple measures. This is exactly what this legislation is focused on. So I'm proud of the bill that's being advanced by the governor, and that we're in partnership with Speaker Fahey and myself.
Portland Public. Yeah, go ahead, Julie.
Just say it honors the perspectives of local districts. Local districts have really important perspectives of what's going on in their communities. But importantly, at the state level, it creates a foundation of expectations and interventions and supports for those districts that need it.
I want to ask you, Portland Public Schools leaders say they're going to need more funding if there's to be an increase in expectations and accountability. Is additional funding included in these bills, Julie?
Yes, the accountability proposals this session are just part of the broader work we are doing on education. So increased funding has to be part of the conversation as well. The governor's proposed a record increase in state funding this year. The state school fund will be at record highs. And we're working on accountability, making sure those investments yield better student results. We're also focused on making sure that those resources are being spent on the right things. Over the last few years, we have made investments in targeted strategies that we know work. Things like career and technical education and summer learning programs and early literacy programs. So we are going to continue that work to dedicate funding to those key things that we know improve student performance.
Is it realistic to expect more from school districts that are already facing a big budget hole, Rob?
Yeah, and I think that some of that, so I have to say, for me, this is also personal. Not only did I come through the public school system, I sent 4 kids through the public school system, and both of my sisters are teachers in Portland Public Schools. So you can imagine what Thanksgiving dinner is at my house when we're talking about education. They're the frontline folks that are working directly with our students every day, seeing the challenges that they face. We didn't make it easier with COVID. It was tough. We know that there are social and emotional needs of these kids, sometimes at an all-time high. What the state can do is provide funding and then also a framework so that we can support those teachers with best practices, build on that so that they're feeling the support and also the financial assistance that they need.
And if I want to jump on this as well, if that's all right. Another piece of the proposal that we have not yet talked about is streamlining some of the requirements that we place on districts at the state level. So streamlining the reporting they need to do to the state, consolidating various types of grants so that they have to do less, applying for state grants. I think that's a critical piece of it too. If we're making sure that there are greater expectations on our districts, they do need additional resources. And there's some red tape that we can cut so they can spend more time focusing on educating kids.
Do you see, with this taking effect, that eventually we'll look at Oregon schools and say, wow, they've really improved. They're not so low on the list when it comes to the nationwide studies. What do you think, Rob, on that?
I absolutely believe that we're headed in the right direction. As Speaker Fahey said, we started with the Student Success Act. We need to build on those accomplishments and then, again, partner with our local schools to implement best practices. We've moved graduation a lot since we implemented the quality education model 20 years ago. I think this is the next evolution to be able to provide targeted assistance so every child feels seen and supported and can achieve. And I will tell you, Steve, that this not only is important for making sure that kids can thrive, but it's also really important for the future of our economy right now, to be able to grow jobs so that students see themselves with meaningful life beyond high school, but, and into careers. So this is an imperative. That's why we're so committed to it. That's why we're really supportive of this legislation moving forward this legislative session.
What happens next with the bills, Julie?
Well, as I said, they've had public hearings this week, so that was an important chance for the public to come and provide their input into the proposals. We're still having conversations about whether there will be amendments or other pieces to them, but there's a financial impact associated with those bills. So we will be our budget committee will need to consider them, and then, as President Wagner said, we're looking to pass these before the end of June, before the end of the session.
You two are two busy people down there, so we appreciate your time coming on the program today. Oregon Senate President Rob Wagner and House Speaker Julie Fahey, thank you. We appreciate it very much.
Thank you, Steve.
Thanks.
Okay, we'll be following through to see what happens down there in Salem. When we come back this morning, we're going to have an interview with Democrat Representative Andrea Salinas. We're going to ask her if her party is doing enough to push back against cuts to federal jobs and programs. That's coming up next.